51 million. Schools and they must be expended by December 31st, 2026. There are several primary to invest in critical infrastructure areas. I talked about two of them. Primary areas, and this list has been expanded, public health response to address the negative effects of the economic challenges from the pandemic, to address revenue sector issues in that many of our revenues were declined, so to make sure that services weren't stopped, we had a support system to help with that. It's supported for premium pay. As you know, as we moved into 2021, there was the Great Resignation, and it's impacted everywhere. So we struggle, like other places, to retain and secure critical staffing. The dollars also are allocated or can be allocated for water and sewer infrastructure, as well as broadband infrastructure. The courthouses. Respond to the pandemic and the changes since that period. During our budget discussions, we talked about many different ways in which the dollars could be used. Relief to homeowners who were at the lower income of the medium income level, broadband support, behavioral health infrastructure, food insecurity, housing insecurity. Well, I'll go through the whole list because we're still vetting it, and I'll talk about that process in a second. This chart will show our engagements, and we've engaged primarily between June 21 and all of last year remotely. In Zoom, and I'm sure all of you are probably tired of those types of communications. But the early phases of engagement, as I shared, they were primarily by the Zoom and other means electronically. We did receive some proposals that were jointly funded, that were jointly submitted through the city's process, and so those are getting evaluated now, submitted proposals as well. We will go through an RFP process for additional proposals. Right now, we are up to almost $200 million worth of requests. We only have 60 million. I think they left off a couple of zeros. But so there's lots of interest on how we can make investments. The evaluation period, once the final proposals are awarded, will have an ongoing assessment process. We do have a survey that is online. Some of you may or may not have given your feedback on that. If you've not, please, after today's discussion, just share your thoughts on what you feel we should invest as it relates to the American Rescue Funds. I know there's lots of interest in the broadband, and that is a priority of our board. We started years ago talking about how can we make investments. We've done some studies, et cetera, and Greg will talk some about that. But in addition to broadband, would love to get your feedback on that as well. And so Greg come up and share, and after Greg's session, and again, this is the beginning of an ongoing dialogue. So thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Claudia. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to take you through a few slides to talk a little bit about where we are with broadband and the broadband expansion conversations that we've been having. What I'd like to do is share with you, some of you may not be familiar with what's going on from the state perspective, so what I would like to do is just share with you a 5-minute video. Talks a little bit about what's coming out of the governor's office in Raleigh. Okay.
The internet is incredible. You can explore anywhere, buy anything, or learn about any subject. All you need is a device and a reliable signal. But do you know what the most amazing fact about the internet is? It's that more than 1.1 million households in North Carolina can't access it. That's why Governor Roy Cooper has made providing broadband to all communities and all residents across the state a top priority. Affordable access.
Carolina don't have access, financial means, devices, or skills to take advantage of the opportunities in our increasingly digital society.
That means people can't search for or apply for jobs online. They can't help their children do regular homework or provide at-home learning during a global pandemic that's forced every home to become a remote school.
The high-speed internet is crucial and critical in the home for students to be successful. All educators, when we're thinking about technology, internet, remote learning, it really has made us take a different approach. Students are going to have to learn from home. They're going to have to do work from home. Students who do not have that high-speed internet at home are really going to be at a disadvantage. They're not able to access and see teacher instructional videos online. They're not able to complete some of their assignments, some of their work. Learning loss is happening if they do not have that high-speed internet. So we've got to make it accessible for our students so that students can learn at their levels at home and close that digital divide.
The North Carolina Office of Rural Health and Broadband Infrastructure Office combined forces a few years ago to do a telehealth and broadband feasibility study. So we found that access to broadband, especially at the home, was still a need. People can go to their local library or to their school, but when it came down to access to broadband in the home, gap, and we were now able to quantify that with data. We also found that there is a need for digital literacy training for providers and patients. When COVID hit, we realized the urgency of getting telehealth into patients' homes, and then also providers being able to connect with their patients via telehealth. There are some barriers, I would say, in order for us to really make sure that telehealth is successful. One, education, making sure that patients know how to use broadband there, also being able to afford the broadband subscription that is coming to their home.
Well, so far I've proposed $1.2 billion in state and federal investments to close the digital divide that'll also leverage investments from the private sector. This proposal includes investments in closing our equity gaps, infrastructure, high-speed internet affordability, and digital literacy. so that people from all corners of our state can access the benefits of our digital economy.
I feel like we're making strides to everyone having access to high quality, affordable broadband. Some internet service providers have said the return on investment just isn't there. We've seen some great investments with the GREAT grants through Governor Cooper's administration, and we've seen a lot of the incentives for internet service providers to go into what we call that last mile for broadband. I think what we would love to see is also actual broadband to the home. So not just in a community many times or where the businesses are, but how can we make sure every home is connected?
So with COVID-19, we really made us sit back and really think our approach and understand the importance of technology, but also high-speed internet. But even on a day where students are not able to come to school, whether it's a snow day or storm,
COVID has shown us is just how much we need broadband in the homes for education and for quality of life, being able to stay connected even in a situation where we may be quarantining at home, we can still connect. So just having access in the home is critical. I feel like we're going there, but we definitely have still a ways to go, especially in our rural communities.
Okay, so let me back up. As Claudia indicated, my name is Greg Marrow. I head up the information technology for Durham County government, and we've been looking at these digital divide challenges now, I would say, for probably the last couple of years, and looking at what funding is available, and the state is making $1.2 billion of investment available to to cover a number of digital divide challenges. And I'm sure many of us have already experienced during the pandemic many of those digital divide challenges. I've certainly gotten my fair share of calls over the last couple of years with families who are experiencing these kind of challenges, particularly in the northern part of our county. So I'm very happy to see that the state is now moving forward. We are starting to see some private-public partnerships around the state. This chart here just sort of indicates a couple of those private-public partnerships. One in Alamance County, where they are now expanding their broadband services. Rockingham County now expanding their broadband services, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the work going on in Orange County, where they've started this process a couple of years back, and they are now expanding their broadband services as well. Trying to reach that last mile, which is always a challenge for many of the ISPs. So we've published a request for proposal. That request went out about a week or so ago on March 23rd to the ISPs, and so we are now looking for a partnership with an ISP who is interested in helping Durham County government with broadband expansion here in the county of Durham. You can see there that we're looking for proposals by April 14th, and we're hoping to go through the review process and select a partner based on the criteria that we've indicated in the ARPA, and certainly willing to answer any of those questions that you may have on what that criteria is. And you heard in the video the reference to great grant applications, and those are applications for the ISPs to apply for funding to expand broadband here in the county. So certainly many of the ISPs want to partner with local governments, because that will certainly make their application look a lot more attractive. Selected a partner. So this is just directly from the North Carolina Broadband Infrastructure Office. If you haven't seen their website, on their website, they talk about a number of grants. You've heard the reference to the GREAT grant, GREAT standing for Growing Rural Economies with Access to Technology. So that's the GREAT grant program, and again, that grant program is targeting ISPs, Internet Service Providers, and then they have several other grant programs as well that you can go out and read about. All of this information is available on the North Carolina Broadband Infrastructure website. Okay? And so the GREAT grant program, right, that grant is targeting, as Claudia mentioned, unserved as well as underserved, right, meaning that it's serving those communities that may have internet access but may not have, may have less than 20 meg per second up and 100 meg per second down, right? And so those communities that have less than that referred to as underserved communities. And so this GREAT grant program is targeting households that are underserved as well as may have no internet access at all, okay? And we've actually, through mapping and looking at the data, we have discovered that over 3,000 eligible households who have not responded to the broadband survey in Durham County really qualify for the GREAT grant. So we certainly want to encourage households who haven't taken the broadband survey to certainly go out and do that. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. And again, all of this information is available on the North Carolina Broadband Infrastructure website. I threw this chart in just simply to say that, it talks a little bit about the criteria that the state will use in terms of qualifying internet service providers. And again, the area I wanted to highlight was, again, those minimum speeds, right? So they're looking for ISPs who can provide at a minimum bit per second up and a 100 megabit per second download speed. Now, certainly if they can go higher than that, they will get more points. So we're trying to incentivize, right? The state is trying to incentivize, and certainly we're doing the same thing with our RFP. We're trying to incentivize those ISPs who can step up and provide faster services, right? Because we know that, to do telehealth, to do remote education, services like that, you're going to need faster speeds, right? So that takes us to the broadband survey. You heard me mention this is a very important survey because this gives this is designed to gather information on locations in the state without adequate internet access and speeds. Actually, when you're taking the survey, it actually does a speed test right there on the spot. So it alerts the state on what you're, and so that it's very important. If you take a look at the, so I did a quick snapshot of the broadband survey dashboard, and again, all of this information is available at this website. So I went out and looked at the dashboard just to get a feel for the number of people that have taken the survey to date, and you can see here total survey responses on the right-hand side of the chart. It's about up around 81,000 people have taken the survey to date. You can see that around 21,000 are the number without internet access. These are statewide numbers that we're looking at right now. And you can see that about 3,600 out of the 81,000 number without access to cell as well, right? And then on the left-hand side of the chart, it shows at the very bottom we have about 10,000 users with speeds under the 25.3. So that would be considered underserved within our state. The dashboard also allows us to zoom in on Durham County, and you can see here that we've only had about 1,100 survey responses to date. And out of that 1,100, we have 126. They were able to determine that 126 do not have internet access, And again, out of that, the number without access to cellular services is about 22 households. And the number with speeds under 25.3 comes in about 131. Again, this is a snapshot as of this morning, actually. So I think the key takeaway from this is that the state is using this data, right, to determine funding and where funding will go. As you heard me say, that we have a lot more than 1,100 that can use and benefit from this funding that the governor is making available. So we certainly need, I think the key message, the takeaway this evening is we really need folks to go out and take the survey, and we really need to spread the word to friends and neighbors and any businesses that we may be familiar with in the northern part of Durham County that could benefit from broadband expansion and can benefit from leveraging these dollars that the governor is making available. So that's the key message and the key takeaway. We're certainly willing to, as we answer questions, to drill down and answer any specific questions that you all may have. Thank you. Yes. Okay.
So as Greg shared, we welcome questions. I know there is at least one resident that has been in conversation with us for some time in the audience about broadband, and I know there may be some questions that are burning questions that are from some of the attendees tonight. Greg mentioned the importance of getting folks to fill out the survey. We are going to have a push for that. We will do a mailing beginning mid-April. We will have a series of mailings, and we can gauge with the state who's actually responded. And so we'll have a targeted mailing. And then late May, early June, we'll do the old-fashioned groundwork. Okay. We will do some door knocking and hanging of information on doors. We will also get some feedback from the residents and community and you on ways that we can get the outreach going. And so that is real important. You know best how to get stakeholders to the table. And so we will be doing the traditional outreach with community organizations, churches, civic groups to get folks interested in taking the survey. And it doesn't take long. And for those that have filled it out, they can speak to that as well. The use of ARPA funding. Our board in the next couple of months will be finalizing sort of how much we will spend. Prior to these dollars, there was a commitment from the board to invest in ARPA, in broadband and expansion. So we're fortunate to live in a community where the board sees it as a priority and that we have the ability to finance it. But I'm so grateful that there are dollars so that we can go further and faster. And so, again, we'll welcome any questions that you may have at this time or suggestions that you may have as well.
So I do have a question.
Okay.
You said that you had requested from the ISPs that they fill out this RFP.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you expect a great response from them, or have you already gotten any response from them?
That's a great question. Can you repeat it?
Great question. So the question is, have we gotten any responses from the RFP to date? And the answer is no, because we just released it about a week ago today. And so it's only been on the street for about less than 7 days. So I did talk with an ISP today who is in the process of completing the RFP. So I do expect at least minimum, judging from neighboring counties and the response that they got, I'm expecting at least a handful. Yes.
That would be great, but part of the reason I'm asking the question is, I should introduce myself to
Okay.
you since you and I have talked.
Okay.
Dorner.
Oh, okay. It's good to place a face with the name.
I want us to just clap.
Last fall or
Yes.
That's right.
late last summer. You all had suggested to me that I talk to the ISPs.
Yes.
For such a thing, and I really couldn't get in from them that
Yeah.
they would even look into it.
Yeah.
And naturally, they're out there to make money, and
Yes.
they're gonna want the low-hanging
You
fruit.
got it.
Places that it's easy to provide internet service
That's
to
right.
and inexpensive.
That's right.
So is there no way, other than waiting for them to decide they want to do it, that these requests for the provision can be?
That's a great question, and Greg can
Yeah.
and flesh it out further. So with the RFP, we explained the number of houses or instances of service that we desire for the provider to do. And it will be through a combination of investment. The internet service provider, in most cases, will come to the table with money. The difference now than when we talked 2 years ago
Yeah.
is that there's a lot more resources available.
Yes.
The infusion of dollars from the federal government, as well as the dollars that local governments have. So that federal government dollars to the states and local governments gives an entity 2 pots of money, plus the investment that the internet provider will have to do. So they will be incentivized, and I know from a business model perspective, there may be some places that will maybe a little bit more costly. And I know, for instance, in your situation, there are some geographical unique challenges that may make it tricky. However, that's not going to be the situation for every household. So from the county's desire is that everyone has access, okay? So that's our benchmark. Getting there, again, is a little bit easier, a lot easier, because there's a partnership and a commitment from the federal government, state government as well as the ISPs see the value in it as well. And Greg can weigh in more.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. We weren't staring at $1.2 billion, right? And now that the governor has made that funding available, I can tell you that folks are now, you can get their attention now. Yeah. And now that we're looking to partner and potentially add to that bucket through local funding, they're excited now. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that does sound promising. I would still love to know if there's any way that residents can influence that.
Sure. That's a great question.
Yeah, it's great. The question was, any way can residents influence that?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
One important way is the survey. So if we can get 70%
Yes.
of the outstanding homes that have not filled out the survey, that will help us tremendously, because that bolsters our competitiveness
Right.
with the state application process.
Yes.
So they'll have evidence that these households desire the service, they filled out the survey to test speeds, so that helps us get access to more dollars. So that's one way that the public can give input as well. Strategy-wise, there are lots of different approaches that communities will be presented with, and I'm sure as we have the RFP, providers will share many different ways. Again, our goal is to have access to everyone as fast as possible. We also know the challenges with that as well. One of the major challenges will be supply, demand, and labor factors. Right now, just for construction on our regular projects, it's a challenge getting contractors at times because the competition is so fierce. I mentioned the Great Resignation earlier, so it's a complex time, but we're going to keep pushing through it. So I said all that to say the one main way is for us to have a good indication on need, and that will bolster our case. We have a strategy, as I shared earlier, in addition to publicizing, hey, fill out the survey, we're going to bombard people, and then we're going to solicit your help too to help us think through, well, who do we tap into to get folks to fill it out, especially when we start doing the ground game and we start knocking on doors and say, hey, can you fill this out? Because that will give us the evidential data to bolster how and where we invest. Yes, sir.
How many providers were invited to respond? And an example, maybe who those would be?
Sure. The question is how many providers were invited to respond, and can we give an example of who some of those providers might be? So, two things, right? When we publish an RFP, anyone can respond, right? We make that available through the newspaper, and then we put it up on our website. So any ISP can respond. But I do know some of the big ISPs like Charter Spectrum, Frontier, and AT&T, and then even some of the, the less, we may not be familiar with the names like River Street Wireless and others. Certainly I'm anticipating responses from all of them.
Looking at the timeline, there's 23 days. Is that typically enough turnaround?
Well, we've left it open. If any of the ISP says, similar to the GREAT grant, right? Because they just extended the GREAT grant for another 30 days. So if an ISP says we need more time to respond, we're certainly willing to be flexible on that date.
And then once it goes through the RFP process, I think some of the dates in the future go out to certain monies have to be incurred and obligated by December 31. That's 2 years and 9 months, and then it must be paid for and all the obligations were completed. December 31, 2026, 4 years and 9 months out.
Yes.
Do we expect is that the realistic expectation? We're effectively 3 to 5 years away.
That is, well, that's for all funding. We hope it moves faster than that.
For the internet portion.
Yes,
For the
internet portion.
right. And
Yeah.
so, because there are other, the American Rescue Act dollars also support water sewer projects as well. And those can also, anything that's construction related may take a little bit longer. And a lot of that is supply demand issues, or sort of market factors. And so, and those dates may change, but we are hopeful to secure a vendor as quickly as possible so that the work can start.
Yes.
Yeah.
Within this decision rubric, the weighting of what's given, the multipliers and so forth.
Sure.
What would you anticipate the type of service would be? Would it be something that's, fiber optic state of the art, or would it be something that's more a bit dated or perhaps even archaic? I mean,
No. So if you look at the GREAT grant, if you really drill down into the GREAT grant, they're asking for fiber. Yep, fiber to the home. That last mile to be fiber. Yep.
So is that the only thing that's being considered, or just the main thing?
That's the main thing. Now, if a service provider comes to the table and can show that they can hit those speeds and exceed those speeds as the GREAT grant, as part of the GREAT grant criteria, then certainly they will be looked at. Yep.
Don't get me
I
wrong.
understand.
Yes. Yeah. Ideally, you want fiber, right?
That's right. Great question.
Yeah. Very good.
I'm sorry I came late, but I have a question. It says that this is for the unincorporated areas. So we're talking like
That's a great question.
Yeah, I don't have the map in front of me, but it's that area north, from northern, yeah, sort of north. And then there's some other areas as well. I don't have the map, but that's a great, yeah.
We'll follow up more specifically
Yeah.
and get your address
Now,
information.
I hear that, Google, they say, my friend who lives in South Durham say, oh, they're putting
Yes.
up Google Lines, so what does that mean for us in Durham?
Yeah. So I can tell you, Google is primarily looking at, within the sort of city limits, because it's a little easier to deploy fiber. And so from everything that I'm reading and seeing, Google's focus right now is within the city limits.
That explains what.
Bingo. Yes. Yes.
That is a good question. Are we able to get, is there specifically a map? Because when I try to overlay on that one slide that you had on the previous thing that was emailed out, and the resolution wasn't really good enough to quite tell what was what, but it did appear that my fear that it's the Little River, and if you're south of the Little River, that doesn't cover us.
Yeah.
40 feet on the other side of the river, they're all covered.
Yeah.
And so, we live in an area, there's about a 3/4 mile stretch where no one has internet. Everybody, all the way around us, does.
Yes. So one of the requirements we put in our RFP is how easy it is to expand into areas not covered by the Great Grant. So that was, so we will be looking at that response.
And we may be part of it.
Yes, we may be,
If
exactly.
there's a resource that we can check, I'd love to just link to it.
So all of those maps are available, by the way, on the North Carolina Broadband. There's a link to all of the maps.
Okay.
You're welcome. Yes.
And before we leave, we'll make sure we get everyone's email address, and we can send that information out to you
Absolutely.
as well.
Yep.
I think there was another question.
Yes.
My name is Cindy Robinson. I'm with my colleagues here from the Camden Institute, Carrie and Christina. We wanted to find out a little bit more about the plans for investing in digital literacy. Because as we see it, having been in Durham County for 19 years, our organization has given away 45,000 computers across North Carolina, 11,000 of which, or about 25% here in Durham County. In 2014, we started education camps after school, as well as for seniors, and we've been in that business for educating. We know that from experience that it's not just access, but there's other inhibitors to internet usage, and that is education. So what are the plans that Durham County may have for funding and improving access to digital literacy classes, basically education for all different age groups?
That's a great question. The ARPA funds are available in lots of different categories. To date, we've only allocated about $5 million. So the remaining $57 million, we're still sorting through how it will be allocated. There are proposals or frameworks that do look at digital literacy as well. And I'm sorry, I can't speak to with great confidence all of those nuances, and part of it is that we will have additional formal RFPs for entities to. So, but I'll do a follow-up response on that, because there's another group that's looking at broadband and digital literacy, and so we can share that information as well. But you're still in the early stages for to give feedback about it, as well as we do RFPs for those components to seek funding if we do it in that space. Broadband was a little bit different in that we pulled the trigger for the RFP earlier because we've been talking about it more formally for some time. And one of your biggest champions is here tonight. And it's been a frustrating point for us as staff, in that, as Greg shared, the challenge of internet service providers bidding on projects. We put out bids before and didn't get projects because entities didn't see
Right.
how they could get a benefit from it. Although we would say, hey, we're going to invest in it, we will, underwrite it, because our board saw this as an economic investment as well. It's an educational investment, it's an economic investment. And so they're willing to pay for it. However, when looking at what the provider would have, it was just not a proposition if they didn't think the federal dollars would also be there to support it. So we're, again, at a different place in time, so we were able to pull that trigger a little bit quicker. But we will have more information on the other areas as well.
And we support Camden through the donation.
Electricity.
Yeah. I was going to just mention that we've been supporting Camden for, I don't know, probably the last, certainly since I've been with Durham County, going on 10 years now, in terms of donating computers. And they get most of our used computers. Absolutely, yes.
All right. Are there other questions?
Do you know how many people were impacted? I looked up the population of the city and the population of the county. I subtracted the two, and I ended up with what's in the rural area, but I don't know how many of that number, which is about 42,600 that are impacted in that map that don't have real access. Any idea how many people, and then maybe a more accurate thing is households?
Yes.
Because if you look at the governor's information on households,
Right.
there's like 2.52 people per house. I just looked up,
Yep.
and there's like 10.6 million people in North Carolina. Then you end up with about 10 households. That means there's about 1 million households. 26% of North Carolina is in the definition of what the governor's saying.
Yes.
But how does that translate to the numbers here in Durham County? Any idea?
So what we have done is we've looked at how, what falls into those, what would be eligible for the great grant, and we came up with about 3,000 households. Yep. Mm-hmm. But again, out of those 3,000 households, keep in mind that only 1,100 have completed the broadband survey. So
we're going to aggressively go after the
Yes.
others
Yep.
to get their feedback.
Yep. I just wanted to go back to the digital literacy, just to mention that I am very familiar with that. I used to work for a company called Nortel Networks, and we used to address digital literacy on the weekends. We had a weekend program where residents would come out to the Research Triangle and take classes on. We would offer classes all day on Saturdays, whether it's on how to connect to the internet, how to use the internet, Microsoft classes. And most of our attendees were Durham public school teachers. And then the program grew so large, we had teachers coming from all around the state to take classes like that. So I would love to do something like that again. I've been kind of churning in the back of my head how to do that, but certainly you all have programs already doing a lot of that kind of work, and so I certainly applaud that. Yep. It's awesome. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
So what's the best way for us to keep in touch with the progress of this?
Sure.
I think you said 23 days until you expect something back
Yes.
from the ISPs. At that point, will that information be public?
That's a great question. And Greg, did you want to walk through that part, or I can?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. Typically, after an RFP process occurs, we will get the bids in, and we'll evaluate them and see if they met the criteria that was asked. If we have qualified applicants and we feel like we can move forward, we will then present those for public conversation with the board, and at that time, the public can also weigh in as well as far as whether or not they feel that's a good vendor or a selection or not. If the board then moves forward with that, we would develop a contract with that entity and move forward pretty quickly. Timing-wise, with the great grant application, there may be some nuances with some of the ISPs. So for instance, if they put in an application with the state, there may be some contingencies upon if they are awarded a certain amount or how much Durham County will have to pay. So some of that may be some if-then statements. So this May-June window of time may be a little bit different, but I'm grateful because there are some dollars on the other side potentially that can mean less taxpayer dollars to support the expense. One way is we'll make sure we get everyone's information, and so that we can put a list together, and we'll keep you updated on the progress on how it's flowing.
Yeah, the great grant deadline is May 3rd, so the state will, before they will announce, the winners of, okay, we're gonna give you grant dollars to get started, right? So that may take 30, 45, 60 days. I don't know. No, I don't know the turnaround on that. Yeah.
One of the challenges I would think would be that currently there are a lot of different technologies in the area.
Yes.
That a few people have fixed wireless and a few
Yes.
people have
That's right.
DSL. And by the time you find out what all these people have, one technology may be an improvement for a certain portion of people, but the remainder may not feel it's an advantage for them at all.
Sure.
Which is why I think as long as people in North Durham County have been cobbling together different internet access technologies, it almost pushes you to a fiber.
Yes.
Because that's the only thing that will be a win for most people.
That's right.
Or that will be a win for the most people.
Yes.
So I'm wondering how many of the ISPs that you have solicited information from would actually deal with fiber.
Yeah. I would think good question is how many of the ISPs would actually deal with fiber? Certainly all of the big guys, right? Your Charter, Spectrum, your AT&T, your Frontier. I think when you start to get into some of the niche, the smaller, like some of the others, they may bring more wireless technologies to the table. And so we'll just have to see, what those proposals look like. Keep it in mind, right? You have the criteria that the state is looking for, and you get more points. The ISP will get more points if they can say, we can go up to 100 megabits per second symmetrical, both up and down. And if we can go faster than that, you even get more points. And so there's an incentive there to really bring state-of-the-art technology to the table. Yeah.
When the RFP proposals come back, how do the providers look at it? Do they say, you've got to expend X dollars per household to make this happen? I mean, how do they price what they're doing just to put the infrastructure in?
Well, I can't speak to that directly, but I'm sure they go through a business case analysis, right? I'm certain that it has to be a return on investment for them, right? And so they will probably, based on some of my preliminary conversations, they may look at households in the Great Grant territory and say, I can't do all 3,000. But out of the 3,000, I can do 2,000 because I can see a ROI on that, right? I can see a return on investment if I just go into these areas, right?
And do we as a county have a commitment, or is there that we would say we would spend X dollars per household if there's $2,000? I mean, how do we evaluate that as a citizen?
That's a great question. So, our initial our desire is to ensure everyone. The question then becomes how quickly we can get there and how much it would cost, which is a challenge with a lot of the bigger infrastructure issues that we have. I mean, we have some water sewer challenges that we've been dealing with for some time, and we're incrementally getting there. We know the way the world is changing, this is so crucial. It's a life safety issue, and I know from conversations, it's real. So once we see what the numbers are, then the question will be for us as the county, well, how do we close the gap? And what does that look like? How much would we need to finance? How much would we need to, use of our ARPA dollars, okay? If it requires additional tax rate support, what does that look like? Because although it's in this part of the community, we all benefit when we have the access. And so you raise a great point. Again, it's an easier question 2 years later than I know when Ms. Dorner and we started having conversations a few years ago, and we didn't have that we didn't have access to the dollars. So closing the gap will be easier, but we know there may be some pockets, and we may have to be creative. I mean, we've been real creative, and we've not gotten very far sometimes. But now, with the resources and the ISFPs are coming to the table,
Yes.
and so it's totally different. 2 years ago, Greg, when we tried to just give folks a chance to just map out, well, what is the gap? What would it cost? Because we just wanted to know the number. Because unlike some communities, Durham does have the capacity to do investments differently than other places. We couldn't even get people to bid on a project to do that study. So I'm just grateful we're at this place. Closing the gap will be easier. Within the next few months, we'll know better, well, what will that cost?
Yes.
We're anxiously awaiting, and hopefully it's not a big number, but there's a commitment from our board to make sure we get the access to the community.
Is the internet a regulated utility?
Yes.
I think it is, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Is there any pressure that regulatorily or legislatively? Here's an example.
Yes.
A neighbor says, hey, I got this thing from AT&T. It's great. It's 4G. It's going to 5G. I'm here to him. I don't have it.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, like,
Yeah, that's
like
absolutely
how,
right.
and the same thing with Starlink. I've known that thing for a year and a half.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now they're focusing everything on the Ukraine, and that's understandable.
Yep.
They're doing what they can do. But, I mean, if you let them in, I mean, can't you drive a commitment to say, look, you know, I mean, how do you have one person, a neighbor on two sides has something, but the one in the middle doesn't?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no common sense in the way that it's dispersed.
Yeah.
And so, you know.
I'm thinking now we'll have different leverage.
Yeah.
And they are differently motivated because
Yes.
the dollars are there, not only to establish the access to the services, but also from an affordability perspective, there have been resources allocated to help support families for payment. So it's a different motivation than what we've seen in the past. So, you know, a couple of months from now, I think we'll have some better. It still may, as my poor choice of word, it may be still a little squishy, but it may be still gray in some parts of it.
Yep.
But I'm encouraged, tremendously encouraged.
So along the same lines, as you evaluate the responses from the ISPs who may be interested in deployment of something in some area, will you be able to eliminate pockets of people in that area? As an example of what Tim is talking about, I did recently talk to Spectrum about bringing cable to our home, and they agreed that they would do it for $32,706. Well, that's really, you know, it's a middle-class neighborhood, and that's a pretty prohibitive price.
Sure.
But there are people close by that have it without any difficulty and without any real added expense.
Sure.
So I'm wondering if when you review these
Yes.
responses, if you'll be able to eliminate these pockets where they want to pluck off the low-hanging
Sure.
fruit
Yes.
and the rest of you, we're sorry.
Yes.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And from a business model, we know that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So our question is, what will it take to provide service to all of our residents? Okay? So we know that there will be some components that are easier for them to respond to. So the gap that's left,
Right.
that will be a partnership with the county and the provider to sort of come to some agreement on how do we cover everyone. And so right now it's just hard to say what that looks like, but that's our intent.
Yes. And I think the state has recognized that because they're making other grants available as well. You know, we've just talked this evening about the GREAT grant. They have something called a CAB grant, and I think that CAB grant is to address those areas that the GREAT grant is not addressing. And that will be a grant between local government and the state. So not between the ISP and the state, but between local government and the state. So I think, as Claudia said, there'll be some other opportunities coming down the pipe, you know, over the next couple of months and as we get into the summer to really see the direction of the state and how they plan to use these dollars. But the key will be the data, right? Getting this data and the surveys done, right? Yep.
To follow on her question, ask what I was wondering if the people that is selected of those 3,000, they will have to meet some criteria. Like I wonder if the families with children will have kind of priority. No, it's just my.
No, I think it's going to be mainly based upon location. You know, looking at households that are served and households that have no internet access at all, right? And so I think the ISPs will look at as, you know, which areas can we address easily in this first round of funding.
In these areas, you hear a lot of people saying how often their internet goes out. And now with people working from home,
Yes.
you hear a lot of
Absolutely.
comments about that.
Yeah, and that's why fiber is so important. All the other technologies are a little not as stable and dependable as. Yep.
I have a question about the order of funding. If we're competing against other municipalities for a bid for $4, is there a point where Durham County has to have shovel-ready plans?
That's a great question.
I mean, like, we're first because we're ready to go. Would there be a bottleneck for federal funding getting to this area?
That's a great question. The challenge with this particular issue is that most communities are getting out of the gate at the same time. So it's not like some of the other infrastructure investments we've made in shovel readiness, even for us when we look at our criteria of projects. So those that are, for instance, we have some water sewer projects that we may consider. Some have been on the books. The design work has already been fleshed out. I know by next year we can have a contract let, and even with labor supply chain issues, we can get it encumbered and finished by 2026. So I am sure that the shovel readiness of the process comes into play. With broadband, it's just unique in that so many are at the same place. Because as I mentioned before, we tried 2 years ago to do an engineering study and just couldn't get any. We did a study, it was like engineering light study.
Engineering light.
Of what was going on, but we couldn't get anyone to do it. They just didn't see the return on the investment of even just, and we were going to pay for it in total to just do the work. They just didn't see where they would benefit from it. But to your point, communities that may already be farther along, they may have some advantage, but I think more are in the same position, unfortunately.
Yep.
great question.
And I think that's one of the reasons the state extended the great grant deadline, to give the ISBs more time to, put proposals together and work with the counties and potentially even partner with the counties to make their proposals stronger, right? So I think we're all kind of starting at the same place. My thing is, our residents really got to get those surveys completed and get that data in, right? So that's going to make, when they look at the proposals and look at the data, they can go, wow, this county really needs help. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Looks like we've,
Is any of the ARPA money designated to go toward cellular service, or is it?
it's broadband
Yes.
would be the focus. Yeah, that would be the focus. That's a great question.
Yep.
Because they have pretty specific categories in how the dollars can be used.
Yep.
Okay. Well, it looks like are there any other questions?
Okay.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight. We do have some sheets that I'll get you to, if you don't mind, put your contact information so you can stay in touch and we can keep you abreast to things that are going on. We are available and accessible and welcome your feedback, and we'll keep you abreast because we'll have more conversations like this. What we can do is in a few months come back and share where we are, but we will also, in the interim, get your thoughts on how you can help us spread the word and get folks to help us fill out those surveys.
Yep.
So that we could become even more competitive.
Absolutely.
So thank you all. Appreciate you as Durham County residents.
Yes.
And it's a pleasure being with you this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. Thank you.